Hey, what's up there, everybody? This is Thavius Beck. In the following course, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to synthesis. Synthesis allows us to make sounds from scratch by manipulating various tones and running them through different processes. Now, it can be a little bit intimidating to understand what all this means, but as long as we go over a few basic concepts, you'll be able to make your own sounds from scratch and tailor them to your needs. So, we're going to explore all of this in a program called Bitwig using a device called the polygrid. It's very visual, be very easy to see how things get connected. But before we dive into any of that, let's check out a pre-made synthesizer called the polysynth and understand its structure so that when we start to make our own instrument, we'll know where to start. So, turning to Bitwig, I have two different tracks here. One track has an instrument called the polysynth, and this is what we're going to look at first. The polysynth is a subtractive synthesizer. And ultimately what this means is that we're going to generate our sound from one of two different oscillators. We can also have both of these oscillators generate a sound. We'll define what an oscillator is a bit more once we get into the individual components. But our sounds start here. All right, two different oscillators. Each one can generate a different waveform, and these can create a sound at different pitches. Depending on the waveform, that'll influence the timbre, the tonal quality of the sound. From here, we have the ability to blend these two different oscillators together or just hear one or the other. Once we do that, the output from these oscillators gets fed into a filter. The filter allows us to remove certain frequencies. This is ultimately the subtractive part of the synth. All right, we start with the sound generated from our oscillators and we're able to subtract certain frequencies here. This allows us to shape the tone overall. Lastly, down here, what we have are two different envelopes. Envelopes are a very important concept in synthesis, and again, we'll explain and define these in more detail as we go through the course. Both of these envelopes allow us to modulate a different source. The filter envelope here allows us to modulate the filter frequency, which means we can change it over time. We have an amplitude envelope here, which allows us to change the amplitude or the volume over time. These envelopes are triggered every time we play a note, and the envelope is essentially a shape that's used to, again, modulate a certain parameter. We'll see all of this in detail soon, but for right now, this is the structure of our synth. Based on how this is set up, I'm going to play a note and let's just hear what kind of result that we get. All right, pretty bright and buzzy. The reason why it's bright and buzzy is because, looking at our oscillators, I have a waveform here, and this waveform is basically a sawtooth. We can see it has sharp edges, all right, very jagged, it's not smooth. This waveform generates a lot of harmonics. It's very harmonically rich. It's bright and buzzy. Now, if I look at my little mix knob here, I'm only hearing the first oscillator. If I turn this, now I'm hearing both oscillators evenly. And now I'm only hearing oscillator 2. And we see this as a different waveform. The pitch is different, and the result is that we get a different tone. But I can blend these together and get something that's even more rich. And that's one of the nice things about having two different oscillators here. It's creating a fatter, warmer, richer tone. Now again, it's a very bright sound, and that's where the filter comes into play. So if we like the sound but don't want it to be so bright in terms of the frequency, we can use the filter to remove some of those frequencies. So again, in terms of shaping the sound, I'm removing the high frequencies. We can remove the frequencies above and below a certain point. We can remove all the lowest frequencies and keep the highs. So we have a lot of options here with just these few controls, all right? Now, there's many examples of synthesizers that have a similar structure, and we can actually create something like this from scratch in Bitwig using the polygrid device. So we're going to explore how we can build something like this from scratch. Once you understand how all the components work, it'll be very easy for you to manipulate these things to make exactly what you want to make.